With space tourism now at an all-time high, many have been wondering how the future of the industry is looking. For decades, we've wanted to experience the wonders of deep space for ourselves. And if SpaceX has anything to do with it, this dream could very shortly be made a reality. But what do we actually know about the company's Starship? And what are the hopes that it carries? For all this and more, stay tuned. First of all, let's take a look at what's meant by the term Starship. Although science fiction films like Star Trek have caused the concept to be confused over the years, Elon Musk and the brilliant minds behind SpaceX refer to a Starship as the entire system used to bring the launch into orbit. This includes the first stage of the launch system, that is ejected shortly after launch, as well as the spaceship, which later operates as the direction of the pilot. Funny enough, this isn't a definition shared by a large portion of the world, who still only refer to the upper stage of this system as the Starship. At last, that's what Dr. Abhi Tripathi has said in the past. And as the director of mission operations at the Space Sciences Laboratory at Berkeley, his opinion isn't one that should be taken lightly. SpaceX has undoubtedly played on this difference in definition by naming their latest spacecraft by the same name, and it really doesn't matter how you define what a Starship is at the end of the day, as regardless of which definition you use, SpaceX's Starship is absolutely massive in size. It stands around 50 meters tall and can carry a load upward of 100 tons. In fact, the maximum load of its cargo has been designated as just under 150 tons, more than enough to take a colony to Mars. The spacecraft itself can regenerate about 3.2 million pounds of thrust. Still, nothing compared to the 17 million pounds of thrust generated by its first stage booster. So now that we know what it is, why has SpaceX decided to build the Starship? According to Tripathi, Starship has been built for a particular set of reasons. The first sees the spacecraft being used as a cheap means of placing Starlink satellites into orbit. For those of you who don't know, Starlink refers to the current SpaceX project in which satellites are being used to broadcast the internet into some of the hardest to reach places. Just recently, the aeronautics company made these satellites available to Ukraine, which was previously without internet as a resultant of this unlawful invasion of their country by Russia. How much cheaper could this be though, as we're looking at the launch of a massive spacecraft? Well, you'd actually be surprised. You see, at the moment, SpaceX is relying on singular launches to get Starlink satellites into orbit. And when you start calculating just how much the aeronautics giant has spent on getting this project up and running, the costs really begin to add up. This isn't the only reasoning behind the launch of Starship though. It's also meant to be used to fulfill SpaceX's human landing system contract with NASA, which sees human beings returning to the moon. And last but not least, Starship is also meant to be useful in Elon Musk's plan to finally set up a permanent settlement on Mars, something the billionaire has had in mind for the last decade or so. Suffice to say, there are a lot of reasons for the creation of Starship, even if the Mars settlement is hard to imagine. Will Starship be capable of doing what is expected of it though? Essentially speaking, it's easy to see why Starship has been created by referring to the various things that will help SpaceX achieve, but the real question is whether Elon Musk is aiming for the mountaintop only to land in the gutter. These are rather high ambitions for a private company after all, and we have to remember that after obtaining funding for NASA over the last few years, SpaceX is still lacking in the goals achievement department, at least as far as Starship is concerned. According to a spokesman from the aeronautical giant though, the massive spacecraft will be able to do all of this and more. On the one hand, its ability to carry around 150 tons will make it one of the best space carriers on the market. We will finally be able to carry both cargo and people back and forth from the International Space Station. And if a Mars settlement is really in the cards, a spacecraft as big as Starship will be necessary to not only populate the planet, but bring with it essential equipment and materials. It can also be used to build bases of support in the same breath, which is of paramount importance when it comes to our overall mastery of space exploration in the future. So while the specific goals of Starship are pretty obvious, it sounds like in general the spacecraft will help humanity achieve what's truly possible from the realm of space tourism and exploration, the key to multiplanetary life. But you'll be surprised to hear that SpaceX isn't the only one improving things. Take a look at NASA and you'll see that the organization has also been hard at work creating its version of Starship and Super Heavy, which together has been called the Space Launch System. In fact, the SLS actually predates the idea of Starship, but reports seem to suggest that it was Musk who first developed the notion on NASA's behalf. Since Congress must have okayed the idea to build a heavy-lift spacecraft, it goes without saying that SpaceX isn't the only company looking towards the future. And this is a good thing considering how healthy competition is always necessary to spur innovation. It's responsible for the massive surge in space tourism we experienced last year, after all. So although it was NASA who originally came up with the idea, it isn't all surprising that SpaceX has quickly overtaken the organization with the creation of Starship. Rumors also suggest that the organization will be relying on private bodies, like SpaceX, to continue ferrying astronauts to and from the International Space Station until it ceases its operation in 2030. Either way, it sounds like we're gonna need a different heavy-lift spacecraft if we do intend to set up a colony on Mars in the future, which is why we're excited about SpaceX's intention to launch Starship in the next few years. Other agencies won't want to be left behind, and we believe this includes NASA. Fast forward years later, and we might have a global fleet. Has SpaceX tested the Starship though? The short answer to this question is yes, but when you really look at it, the testing phase hasn't been the most successful to date. Most of the prototypes have been built by SpaceX in the past have unfortunately exploded in the process of launching, some of them just moments after leaving the ground. Even one of the best tests of the Starship prototype saw the spacecraft launching and then landing moments later, only to explode minutes after setting itself down again on the launch pad. Suffice to say, SpaceX still has a ways to go when it comes to the creation of a heady life spacecraft. And as of right now, the dream of setting up a colony on Mars is looking to be just that, a dream. At least that was the thought until May of last year, which saw SpaceX land a Starship prototype for the first time without any explosive reactions. According to reports, the spacecraft reached an altitude of approximately 10 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, later using 3 Raptor engines to touch down safely on the launch pad. What SpaceX hasn't done is launch their Starship into orbit though, which will no doubt be the next step in interplanetary travel. And it's an exciting time for us space fans, as the launch is said to be taking place on March 28th. That's under a week away, and we couldn't be more excited to see how things turn out. So in conclusion, Starship could easily transform the future of spaceflight. It's undoubtedly the next level of rocketry in humanity's attempt to conquer the stars and explore the universe beyond our tiny spinning ball of life. And if SpaceX is able to finally complete the development and certification of Starship, it goes without saying that new pathways to space exploration will be opened up for other companies and space agencies alike. And we're not just talking about useful trips for the establishment of a Mars colony. That's still decades in the making. We're also talking about commercial flights that can hold hundreds of passengers at a time, making for more inexpensive space tourism for those of us who can afford the price. Since the current price of traveling through space is somewhat unreachable for us normies, this little improvement will be much appreciated. Who knows, in the next few years we could be taking a trip to the moon rather than a vacation to Hawaii. Anything is possible. And there you have it, just some of the most impressive facts pertaining to SpaceX's Starship. What do you think of our hopes for the future though? And if given the chance, would you take the trip to Mars? Be sure to let us know in the comment section down below.